It's not you. It's not you that being weak. It is neurophysiology. And there are things that we can do in terms of making ourselves prevent this happening from you, like what I felt when I was ushering at the graduation baccalaureate mass inside the church. It was so hot. So imagine you're in a hot situation, in a hot environment. You don't have to perspire. You're wearing a toga, you're wearing this in a warm environment, let alone outside, and you stay there. You feel flush. Your face feels flush. Suddenly you feel like, oh, there you go again. You feel flushing in your face, and then you feel like lightheaded. And if you're not careful about intervening right away, then you can fall. But the worst thing, fall injury, it can fracture your hip. It can also damage your brain by bleeding. But why is this happening? So, clue, you need the blood vessels, vasodilation, meaning the blood vessels dilate, meaning it opens up, and the reflexes constrict to preserve. You need blood going to the brain, or what you call cerebral perfusion, to be able to operate the brain. And then you also need circulation to the heart, to the arteries, so that the body can pump blood pressure and all the stuff. What happens is when you have sudden impulse of pain and you're sensitive, for example, the vagus nerve is not toned, meaning you have this tendency, propensity to collapse because your blood vessel is always dilating like this. It cannot pump blood to the brain. Then you feel like helpless. You feel like flushed. Your heart starts racing because you will try to compensate blood to make sure that blood is pumping to the head. Related to that also, remind me, is volume. This is the same mechanism when you have heat stroke or heat stroke is when you really collapse. Heat exhaustion is when you have the symptoms of you feel tired, you feel exhausted, you feel lightheaded. Those are symptoms because the vagus nerve is very sensitive also to the baroreceptors or the receptor for the pressure, usually here in the sinus and the arch. If you don't have a good support of volume, then the autonomic nervous system switches, taps the sympathetic tone and say, hey, we need something. Either you fight, flight because you're almost dying. First thing you need to do is to hydrate. Clue? That's the reason why I ask, if you see the students here, they always have a water bottle in their bags because their thirst mechanism is intact, meaning slight decrease in their volume. They feel thirsty, they need to do that. Unfortunately, in the mature category, above 40, the thirst mechanism is shut down or not functioning properly. It's not sensitive. How does that translate to you practically? That means you really need to bring water bottle, especially if you're living in Florida. Because by the time your body is already saying, I don't have volume, I don't have any hydration, thirst mechanism comes in later as the symptoms becomes so worse. So that is important. Hydration, keep the volume of your body, of your blood. Of course, to remind you practical things that when you drink something in your mouth, it takes about 4 hours to go to the bladder. So make some provisions where you're going to be in 4 hours. Make sure there's a bathroom nearby. That's exactly the reason why when you travel, hydrate, you need to empty your bladder before you drive. So it is related to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve comes from the area here at the cervical, and then there's two branches, run right and left, and then it travels long to the intestine and also to the splanchnic area, even to the bladder. That's why the most common response would be you feel flushed in your face, you feel tachycardia, you feel heart racing, you feel lightheaded because you don't feel blood going to the brain, and then you have this feeling of jittery feeling in your stomach. It's almost like something is needing to get out. Sometimes you feel hypermotility. That's why you need to go to the bathroom, both number 1 and number 2. So these are natural phenomenon that you need to be aware. If you're predisposed to this, then be prepared. So what happens? The vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the most important player in this. There's a sympathetic tone and the parasympathetic tone. The vagus nerve is responsible to make it say, if it's toned, then the autonomic nervous system is in the parasympathetic tone, meaning you're able to rest and digest. If you're settling down in the sympathetic tone, you're fight and flight. There's no uh, there's no compromise. You just feel threatened all the time. So what happens is there are five senses: eyes, you see it; nose, you smell it; taste, you taste it; ears, you nose; touch. Imagine if you have a trauma. Let's say you saw a fight or you were raped or something like that. You can actually that is embanked in the memory of having the odor, the movement, the music, the color, and the response is involuntary. Now I'm leading towards when you have anxiety, you trigger this kind of symptoms. It's a defense, it's a fight flight. So that's the reason why many of these patients with anxiety, with trauma, unknowingly they feel like helpless. Suddenly their heart starts racing. But subconsciously, there is a reminder going to the amygdala saying, run, threat, out, go. It could be the color of the shirt that reminded the attacker, or the smell of the perfume, or the noise around it, or even the feeling around it, the music that can trigger response to the amygdala and then process it as a fight flight. So what happens is you have trauma in the past, you have recent trauma, and even if you feel like yes, I'm so strong, I've forgiven that person because this and that, there's still something on inside the amygdala. Because what happens also is this: when you have trauma, when your five senses going in to the amygdala, it's supposed to go to the prefrontal cortex where it's processed and said, okay, these symptoms are actually not threatening. It's okay, baby, calm down. Unfortunately, during acute trauma, these impulses doesn't go to the prefrontal cortex. It stays in the amygdala, and here it's nurtured by this baby. The amygdala, which is the baby, always saying, oh, I was hurt, I was hurt. That's why you need to process this mentally, psychologically, and also process the tone of the vagus nerve. It is important to realize that the symptoms of anxiety, for example, is automatic. You have this reminder of something that you didn't even know. In fact, most of the first episode of attack of anxiety, it was unprovoked. I mean, there's no reason, there was no threat, but it came from the remote past that's embedded in the memory bank, and then it reacts when there's some sensory perceptions that would remind the amygdala saying yes. Where you meet a person, for example, a stranger in the bar or anywhere, and you have this gut feeling of, I don't feel comfortable with this person. The gut feeling, remember, the gut is supplied by the vagus nerve, and the response is automatic. There are two parts of the vagus nerves: the ventral vagal system and the dorsal vagal system. Is social engagement, safety. That's where you feel like, I feel comfortable with you. I don't have to escape. I don't have to fight flight. It is associated with calmness, connectivity, connection, hugging, talking. Oxytocin goes up, a flexibility, regulation. It is by the myelinated vagus pathways from the nucleus ambiguous, which needs toning, meaning when you tone, you keep on exercising, your muscle gets toned. The importance of guided breathing cannot be underestimated. That is why it is important not just to pray, but to meditate, because meditation entails you two elements: guided breathing, let's review. Inhale 4, hold 4, exhale 6 or 8, hold 4. You repeat that at least 20 times and you'll have equivalent to 100 push-ups. And your vagus nerve is already toned. So that means when there's a threat, your vagus nerve is able to react properly instead of, here's a good response. So the ventral vagal system is what you need, the parasympathetic too. But you need to increase the tone by doing exercises of breathing. And what a good thing to do is to do, Jesus, Son of the living God, when you inhale, have mercy on us sinners when you exhale. At the same time, you're adoring Jesus through his passion, and you're making your vagus nerve healthy. The sympathetic system, fight flight, is the other area of the vagus, of the autonomic nervous system. It enables you to mobilize danger. So the response will be to increase your heart rate, to pump blood to everything, to the muscles so you can run, to the adrenals to increase your blood pressure, to increase the cortisol, and then the cortisol increases sugar so that there will be more fuel acutely. Produces classic anxiety physiology. You have this palpitations, you have this fear, impending doom. But if you know your prefrontal cortex is intact and you train them by guided breathing and meditation, then this can be prevented. Even response to negative comments like that you usually would prevent or do angry, you will have the response will be more tame. You don't react in an angry manner. You could be distracted, you could be disappointed, but you don't get into anger, worse, rage. The dorsal vagal system is very primitive. It's almost like a snake. You know, when a snake or a worm, the reptilian, they just sit in the corner and be safe. If your vagus nerve is not toned, especially when you didn't deal with a trauma in the past, especially during childhood, the dorsal vagal system is equivalent to shutting down or immobilization. That's the reason why people just freeze. Guided breathing to make it thick, because doing this guided breathing, BDNF or brain derived neurotrophic factor is increased, which increases the sheath, the thickness of the myelin in sheath. It is also responsible for increasing the pathway of that image. For example, when you master the mindfulness or the guided breathing, the mindfulness of that specific mystery, like the agony of the garden, or meditating on the wound of Jesus. If you continue doing that, a myelin sheath increases such that that pathway becomes automatic and you don't have to be distracted when you're doing meditation. So try it. Repeat that meditation for 1 week. For example, agony in the garden. Keep that scene. Another type of cell is also activated called the mirror cell, in such a way that that scene in the agony in the garden becomes really vivid. You cannot be distracted. You go like this, who cares? I'm still connected to the adoration. So that's the key, that you have to practice meditation every day. What if we change the paradigm? That because we love Jesus, we want to the adoration chapel and say hello. Imagine the myelin sheath in the brain and also transmitting that to the soul. It will increase in bonding. The oxytocin related to your bonding with Jesus will increase. And the more you will increase your love and your affinity to him, and then you will be more, it's easy for you to go. And that explains why if you get the habit of going to adoration regularly, it's easy for you to go back because you will miss it. Not emotionally, but in the brain. The more you're close to Jesus, because you said the more you're doing the mindfulness of being focusing, for example, in the adoration, just staring like Saint Teresa of the child Jesus, the more you get connected, and the more you meditate on his passion. These saints would say, if you cannot know Jesus that much if you don't meditate on his passion. So going back to where we came from, the symptoms of lightheadedness is related to the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is a nerve supply of the autonomic nervous system divided into two, sympathetic and parasympathetic. And the highest evidence there's there to tone the vagus nerve is guided breathing and add in meditation. So if you don't want to be lightheaded, and with added value also, meditate, guided breathing, and tone the vagus nerve.